Sarah Martinez pulled her silver Honda into the roadside diner's parking lot, the gravel crunching under her tires as she searched for a decent spot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and she could feel the exhaustion from her 12-hour shift at the hospital weighing down her shoulders. All she wanted was a quick coffee, and maybe a slice of that apple pie the diner was famous for before heading home to her empty apartment. As she stepped out of her car, the sound of metal clanging against metal caught her attention. She turned toward the noise and saw a man hunched over the open hood of an old blue pickup truck, steam rising from the engine like morning fog. The truck looked like it had seen better days, with rust spots decorating the fenders and a crack running across the windshield like a lightning bolt. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, wearing faded jeans and a gray t-shirt that had definitely seen too many wash cycles. His dark hair was messy, and she could see the frustration written across his face as he stared into the engine compartment. What caught her attention most, however, was the small boy sitting on the tailgate of the truck, swinging his legs back and forth while clutching a worn teddy bear. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with the same dark hair as the man and the biggest brown eyes Sarah had ever seen. He was wearing a school uniform that was slightly wrinkled, and she noticed his backpack sitting beside him, decorated with cartoon characters that seemed to smile despite the current situation. Sarah found herself walking toward them before she even realized what she was doing. Maybe it was her natural instinct to help people, or maybe it was the way the little boy looked so patient and trusting while his father struggled with the mechanical problem. Either way, she couldn't just walk into the diner and pretend she hadn't noticed their predicament. "Excuse me," she called out softly, not wanting to startle them. "Is everything okay? Do you need any help?" The man looked up from the engine, wiping his greasy hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. Up close, she could see the worry, lines around his eyes, and the way his shoulders seemed to carry more weight than just the stress of a broken vehicle. There was something about him that seemed familiar, though she couldn't quite place where she might have seen him before. "Oh, hi there," he said, offering a tired smile. "I'm Marcus, and this is my son Tommy. We're having a bit of car trouble, as you can probably tell." He gestured helplessly at the smoking engine. "I was hoping it was just overheating, but I think it might be something more serious." Tommy waved shyly from his perch on the tailgate, hugging his teddy bear a little tighter. "Daddy says we might have to call Uncle Jake to come get us," he said in a small voice that made Sarah's heart squeeze a little. "I'm Sarah," she replied, giving both of them a warm smile. "I don't know much about engines, but I couldn't help noticing you two looked like you could use some assistance. Have you tried calling a tow truck or a mechanic?" Marcus let out a short laugh that didn't contain much humor. "That's the plan, but honestly, we're a bit tight on money right now. I was hoping I could figure out what was wrong and maybe fix it myself, but—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I'm better with computers than I am with car engines, if I'm being honest." Sarah studied the situation for a moment. The diner had a reputation for being a place where people looked out for each other, and she had always believed in paying kindness forward. Her grandmother had taught her that helping others when they needed it most was one of the most important things a person could do in life. "Listen," she said, making a decision that would change everything. "Why don't you let me buy you both dinner while we figure this out? There's a really good mechanic who comes into the diner sometimes. Maybe we'll get lucky and he'll be there tonight. At the very least, you and Tommy can get a good meal while we wait for a tow truck." Marcus looked surprised by the offer, and she could see him weighing his pride against his practical need for help. "That's incredibly kind of you, Sarah, but I couldn't ask you to do that. You don't even know us." "You're not asking," she pointed out with a gentle smile. "I'm offering, and sometimes accepting help from a stranger is just as important as giving it." She looked at Tommy, who was watching the conversation with wide, hopeful eyes. "Besides, I bet Tommy would like some of their chocolate chip pancakes. They make them all day here, not just for breakfast." Tommy's face lit up at the mention of pancakes, and he looked at his father with such hopeful anticipation that Marcus couldn't help but smile despite their circumstances. "What do you say, buddy? Should we let the nice lady buy us dinner?" "Can I really have pancakes for dinner, Daddy?" Tommy asked, practically bouncing on the tailgate now. "I think we can make an exception tonight," Marcus said, finally allowing himself to accept the kindness being offered. He turned back to Sarah. Thank you so much. This is above and beyond what anyone should do for strangers. I promise I'll find a way to pay you back somehow. Don't worry about that right now, Sarah said, already feeling good about her decision. Let's just focus on getting you both fed and finding someone to look at your truck. As they walked toward the diner together, Tommy slipping his small hand into Sarah's with the trusting nature that only children possess. None of them could have imagined that this chance encounter would lead to revelations that would change all of their lives forever. The broken truck that had seemed like such a disaster just moments before was actually the beginning of something much bigger than any of them could have predicted. The familiar jingle of the diner's bell announced their arrival as Sarah pushed open the heavy glass door. The warm, cozy atmosphere inside was a welcome contrast to the stress of the parking lot situation. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, and the black and white checkered floor gleamed under the soft lighting. The smell of fresh coffee and home-cooked food filled the air, making Tommy's stomach rumble audibly. Well, look who finally made it in, called out Dolores, the evening waitress who had been working at the diner for longer than anyone could remember. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her friendly smile made everyone feel like family. Sarah, honey, I was wondering if you were going to skip dinner tonight. Hi, Dolores, Sarah replied, guiding Marcus and Tommy toward a corner booth. I brought some friends with me tonight. This is Marcus and his son, Tommy. They're having some car trouble. Dolores immediately switched into her motherly mode, which Sarah had witnessed countless times before. Oh, you poor dears. Car trouble is the worst, especially when you have a little one with you. She ruffled Tommy's hair gently as they settled into the booth. What can Dolores get you folks to drink? And Tommy, sweetie, I bet you'd like some chocolate milk to go with those pancakes I heard about. Tommy's eyes went wide with delight. You heard about the pancakes already? Honey, I hear everything that happens in this parking lot, Dolores said with a wink. These walls might look solid, but they've got ears when it comes to folks who need help. As Dolores took their drink orders and bustled away, Marcus looked around the diner with appreciation. This place has a really nice feeling to it, he said to Sarah. How long have you been coming here? About 3 years now, Sarah replied, watching Tommy color on the paper placemat with crayons Dolores had provided. Ever since I moved to town for work, it's become my second home, really. The people here are like family. What kind of work do you do? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the woman who had shown such kindness to him and his son. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah explained. I work mostly in the pediatric wing, which is probably why I have such a soft spot for kids like Tommy here. Tommy looked up from his coloring, suddenly interested in the conversation. You help sick kids get better? That's right, Sarah said, smiling at him. I make sure they take their medicine and help them feel less scared when they have to stay in the hospital. That's really cool, Tommy said solemnly. I had to go to the hospital once when I broke my arm. The nurses there were really nice to me too. Marcus reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder gently. That was a scary day for both of us, he said to Sarah. Tommy fell off the monkey bars at school. I think I was more frightened than he was. It's always harder on the parents, Sarah agreed. What about you, Marcus? What do you do for work? There was a brief hesitation before Marcus answered, and Sarah noticed the way his jaw tightened slightly. I work in technology, he said simply. Software development mostly. It's not as exciting as helping sick children, but it pays the bills. Before Sarah could ask any follow-up questions, Dolores returned with their drinks and a notepad ready to take their food orders. All right, folks, what'll it be tonight? And don't you dare look at those prices, young man, she added, pointing at Marcus. Sarah here is treating tonight, and she's got excellent taste in comfort food. Tommy didn't need any encouragement. Can I please have the chocolate chip pancakes with whipped cream? And maybe some bacon too? Coming right up, sweetheart, Dolores said, writing it down. Marcus, what sounds good to you? I'll take the meatloaf dinner, if that's okay, Marcus said, still looking slightly uncomfortable with accepting charity. And thank you again, Sarah. This is really too much. Nonsense. Sarah waved him off. I'll have my usual, Dolores. The turkey club with sweet potato fries. As Dolores headed back to the kitchen, Sarah noticed that Tommy had drawn what appeared to be a family of 3 stick figures on his placemat. The smallest figure was holding hands with a larger male figure, and there was a female figure standing, slightly apart from them but still clearly part of the group. "That's a beautiful drawing, Tommy," she said, pointing to his artwork. "Can you tell me about it?" Tommy's face lit up with pride. "That's me and Daddy," he said, pointing to the 2 figures holding hands. "And that's you because you're helping us tonight." The simple innocence of the statement made Sarah's heart skip a beat, and she caught Marcus looking at his son with a mixture of love and sadness that she couldn't quite interpret. There was definitely more to their story than just a broken truck and a tight budget. "Tommy has always been good at including people," Marcus said softly. "He has a big heart just like his mother did." The past tense didn't escape Sarah's notice, and she felt a pang of sympathy for both of them. She was about to respond when the diner's bell chimed again, and a tall man in work clothes entered, scanning the room until his eyes landed on their table. "Well, I'll be damned," the newcomer said, walking over to them with a broad smile. "Marcus Chen, is that really you?" Marcus looked up, and his expression immediately changed to one of surprise, and something that might have been panic. "Jake, what are you doing here?" "Looking for you, actually," Jake replied, sliding into the booth next to Sarah without invitation. "Your phone went straight to voicemail, and when you didn't show up for our meeting tonight, I got worried." "Good thing I remembered you mentioning this place before." Sarah felt the atmosphere at the table shift dramatically. Tommy looked confused, Marcus looked uncomfortable, and Jake looked like he had just solved a puzzle. The friendly, relaxed dinner was suddenly charged with an undercurrent of tension that none of them had expected. "Meeting?" Sarah asked, looking between the 2 men. Jake extended his hand to her with a professional smile. "I'm Jake Morrison, Marcus's business partner, and you must be the Good Samaritan who rescued these 2 from their transportation crisis." As Sarah shook his hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to this story than anyone was telling her. The way Marcus was avoiding eye contact and the formal way Jake was speaking suggested that this was not just a casual friendship or simple business partnership. Tommy, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, continued coloring his picture, while the 3 adults sat in increasingly awkward silence, each wondering what would be revealed next. Jake's arrival had definitely changed the energy at the table, and Sarah found herself studying both men more carefully. Marcus seemed to shrink into himself slightly, while Jake had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to taking charge of situations. There was clearly a dynamic here that she didn't understand. "So, Marcus," Jake continued, his tone carrying a subtle edge of frustration, "care to explain why you're eating dinner at a roadside diner instead of being at the office? For our 7 o'clock meeting with the investors from Tokyo?" Sarah felt her eyebrows raise involuntarily. Investors from Tokyo? That didn't sound like the kind of meeting a struggling single father would typically be attending. She glanced at Marcus, who was staring down at his hands folded on the table. "The truck broke down," Marcus said simply. "I tried to call, but my phone died, and I've been dealing with this situation for the past hour." "The truck?" Jake's voice rose slightly. "Marcus, what are you doing driving that old piece of junk? You know we have company cars available. Hell, you could buy a dozen new trucks without even denting your bank account." Tommy looked up from his coloring, sensing the tension in his father's voice. "Daddy, is Uncle Jake mad at us?" "No, buddy," Marcus said quickly, reaching over to pat his son's hand. "Uncle Jake's just worried because I missed an important meeting." Sarah felt like she was watching a conversation in a foreign language. "Company? Cars? Bank accounts that could afford dozens of trucks?" None of this matched the picture of financial struggle that Marcus had painted earlier. She cleared her throat softly. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm a little confused," she said, looking between the 2 men. "Marcus, you mentioned earlier that money was tight, but Jake seems to be suggesting that's not exactly the case." Jake turned to look at her with genuine surprise. "He told you money was tight?" He let out a short laugh that wasn't entirely kind. "Lady, this guy sitting next to you is worth more than this entire town. Marcus Chen is the CEO and majority shareholder of Chen Technologies. His company just landed a $300 million contract with the Department of Defense. The silence that followed Jake's revelation was deafening. Sarah felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She stared at Marcus, who was still looking down at his hands, his jaw clenched tight. Tommy continued coloring, blissfully unaware that his father's carefully constructed facade had just crumbled. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Is that true?" When Marcus finally looked up, she could see shame and something else in his eyes. Maybe fear. Maybe sadness. "It's complicated," he said quietly. "Complicated?" Jake's voice was getting louder, and other diners were starting to glance in their direction. "What's complicated about it? You're one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the state, Marcus. You've got more money than you know what to do with, a penthouse apartment downtown, a house in the mountains, and yet you're driving around in a broken-down truck pretending to be broke." "Jake, please," Marcus said, his voice strained. "Not here. Not in front of Tommy." But Jake seemed beyond the point of caring about discretion. "Do you have any idea how worried I've been? The investors flew in from Japan specifically for this meeting. We're talking about expanding into the Asian market, which could double our revenue. And you're here playing some kind of make-believe poverty game?" Sarah felt like she was in a dream. The shy, struggling single father she had tried to help was actually a millionaire CEO? None of it made sense. She looked at Tommy, who had stopped coloring and was watching the adults with wide, concerned eyes. "I think maybe Tommy should go. Wash his hands before his pancakes arrive," she suggested quietly, hoping to give the boy a break from the adult tension. "Good idea," Marcus said gratefully. "Tommy, can you go wash up? The bathroom is right over there, buddy." As Tommy slid out of the booth with his teddy bear tucked under his arm, Sarah waited until he was out of earshot before speaking again. "Marcus, I need you to explain what's happening here. I offered to help someone I thought was in a difficult situation, but apparently I was completely wrong about everything." Marcus ran both hands through his hair, looking more defeated than she had seen him all evening. "You weren't wrong about everything," he said finally. "Tommy and I really were stranded. The truck really did break down, and I really am grateful for your kindness. But you lied about the money situation," Sarah pressed. "You let me think you couldn't afford a tow truck or a mechanic when apparently you could buy the entire diner if you wanted to." "He's been doing this for months," Jake interjected. "Driving around in that old truck, shopping at thrift stores, living like he's barely getting by. I keep telling him it's not healthy, but he won't listen to reason." "It's not about the money," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "It's about Tommy. It's about trying to give him a normal childhood." "Normal?" Jake's voice was incredulous. "Marcus, the kid goes to the most expensive private school in the city. He has a nanny, a housekeeper, and enough trust funds to set up his grandchildren. How is pretending to be poor giving him a normal life?" Sarah felt a wave of understanding wash over her as she began to piece together what was really happening. "You're trying to protect him from something," she said to Marcus. "From the wealth? From people who might want to use him or take advantage of your family?" Marcus looked at her with surprise, as if she had read his mind. "My wife Lisa died 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Cancer. The last months of her life we couldn't go anywhere without reporters, photographers, people claiming to be her friends but really just wanting access to our money. She died surrounded by vultures instead of the peaceful family time she deserved." Titao. Raw pain in his voice made Sarah's heart ache. Now she understood the sadness she had seen in his eyes, the weight he seemed to carry on his shoulders. This wasn't about money at all. It was about grief, protection, and a father's desperate attempt to shield his son from a world that had already taken too much from their family. "So you've been living like this ever since?" she asked gently. "Not living," Jake corrected. "Hiding. And it's not sustainable, Marcus. You have responsibilities. Employees who depend on you. Contracts that need your attention." Tommy's return to the table interrupted the heavy conversation, and all three adults immediately tried to shift back to lighter topics. But Sarah could see that everything had changed. The simple act of kindness she had thought she was offering had revealed a much more complex situation than anyone had expected. Dolores arrived with their food just as Tommy climbed back into the booth, her timing perfect for breaking the heavy atmosphere that had settled over the table. The chocolate chip pancakes she placed in front of Tommy were enormous, covered in whipped cream and accompanied by perfectly crispy bacon. The sight immediately brought a smile back to the little boy's face. "There you go, sweetie," Dolores said warmly. "Extra whipped cream, just like you wanted." She set down Marcus's meatloaf and Sarah's turkey club, then glanced at Jake. "Can I get you anything, hun? You look like you could use some coffee." "That would be great, thanks," Jake replied, his tone much more subdued than it had been moments before. As Dolores walked away, Sarah watched Tommy dig into his pancakes with the enthusiasm only a 6-year-old could muster. The contrast between his innocent joy and the complex adult situation swirling around him was stark. She found herself wondering how much of his father's struggle he actually understood. "These are the best pancakes ever," Tommy announced between bites, getting whipped cream on his nose in the process. "I'm glad you like them, buddy," Marcus said, managing a genuine smile as he watched his son eat. There was so much love in that. Look, Sarah thought, whatever else was true about Marcus Chen, his devotion to his child was absolutely real. Jake seemed to notice the shift in Marcus's demeanor as well. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Look, Marcus, I'm not trying to make your life harder. You know that, right? I just worry about you. Both of you." Marcus nodded slowly, cutting a piece of his meatloaf. "I know you do, Jake. And I appreciate everything you've done to keep the company running while I've been figuring things out. Can I ask you something?" Sarah said carefully, not wanting to intrude but needing to understand. "When you said you were worried about money for the tow truck, was that just part of maintaining this other identity you've created?" Marcus set down his fork and looked at her directly for the first time since Jake's revelation. "That's the thing, Sarah. In that moment, it felt real to me. When you're driving an old truck and wearing clothes from the thrift store and shopping for groceries with coupons, your mind starts to accept that reality. It becomes easier to believe you actually are that person instead of the one sitting in boardrooms making decisions about millions of dollars. It sounds like you prefer being that person," Sarah observed quietly. "I do," Marcus admitted. "That person doesn't have reporters following him. That person doesn't have to wonder if Tommy's teachers are being extra nice because of who his father is. That person can go to a diner and meet someone like you, who offers help just because it's the right thing to do." Jake received his coffee from Dolores and took a sip before speaking. "But that person also missed a meeting tonight that could have secured jobs for 200 employees in our new division. That person isn't dealing with the legal issues from Lisa's estate that still need attention. That person isn't the one Tommy is going to need when he gets older and starts asking questions about his trust funds and his mother's foundation." Tommy looked up from his pancakes, maple syrup glistening on his chin. "What's a trust fund?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, and Sarah could see him struggling with how much truth to share with his son. She found herself holding her breath, waiting to see what he would say. "It's a way of saving money for when you're older, buddy," Marcus said finally. "Your mom and I wanted to make sure you'd always be taken care of." "Like college money?" Tommy asked, returning his attention to his pancakes. "Something like that," Marcus agreed. Sarah could see the relief in Marcus's face at his son's simple acceptance of the explanation. But she also saw Jake's expression, which suggested that Tommy's trust fund was considerably more than just college. "Money." "Marcus," Sarah said gently, "can I ask what happened to make you start living this way? I mean, besides losing your wife. Was there a specific incident that made you decide to step away from your real life?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if he was going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 3 months after Lisa's funeral, someone tried to kidnap Tommy from school." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She saw Jake's jaw tighten and realized this wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. They knew his schedule, knew which car service picked him up, knew exactly when and where to try to grab him. Marcus continued. The only reason they didn't succeed was because Tommy had stayed after school that day to help his teacher clean the classroom. He was 10 minutes late getting to the pickup spot. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "The FBI told us it was probably someone who had been watching our family for weeks, learning our patterns. They said Tommy would never be truly safe as long as everyone knew who he was and what he was worth." Marcus looked at his son, who was completely absorbed in cutting his pancakes into perfect squares. "So I made a decision. I pulled him out of that school, found us a smaller place to live, and started trying to be invisible." "But you can't stay invisible forever," Jake said quietly. "The company needs you. Tommy needs stability. And honestly, Lisa wouldn't have wanted this for either of you." At the mention of his mother's name, Tommy looked up again. "Mommy always said that helping people was the most important job anyone could have," he said to Sarah. "That's why you're good at being a nurse. And that's why Daddy makes computers that help doctors save people." The simple wisdom from a 6-year-old made all three adults pause. Sarah looked at Marcus with new understanding. He wasn't just hiding from wealth or responsibility. He was hiding from fear. The fear that loving someone, protecting someone, being someone important made you and everyone you cared about a target. "Tommy's right about helping people being important," Sarah said finally. "But sometimes the way we help people changes as we grow and learn. Maybe there's a way to keep Tommy safe while still being who you're supposed to be." Marcus looked at her with something that might have been hope flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and saw a message from her supervisor at the hospital. What she read made her do a double take, and she found herself staring at Marcus with amazement. "Marcus," she said slowly, "I just got a text from my boss at the hospital. She's asking if I've seen the news about Chen Technologies donating $50 million to build a new pediatric wing. She wants to know if I'd be interested in consulting on the project since I work with children." The color drained from Marcus's face. That donation was supposed to be anonymous. "Well, it's not anymore," Sarah said, showing him her phone screen. "And apparently it's all over the news tonight." The news about the donation seemed to shift everything at the table yet again. Marcus pulled out his phone, and Sarah could see his face grow increasingly tense as he scrolled through what appeared to be dozens of missed calls and text messages. "Jake, how did this get out?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with worry. "The donation was structured through 3 different shell companies specifically to avoid this kind of attention." Jake looked uncomfortable. "I may have some idea about that. The legal team had to file some paperwork today for the tax implications. It's possible someone in the state filing office recognized the connection and leaked it to the press. Or," Marcus said grimly, "someone in our own company decided that hiding my identity wasn't good for business." The accusation hung in the air between the two men, and Sarah could see years of friendship and business partnership being tested in real time. She glanced at Tommy, who had finished his pancakes and was now drawing again on his placemat, completely oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around him. "Marcus, you know I would never do something like that without talking to you first," Jake said firmly. "But I won't lie to you either. There are people on the board who think your disappearing act is hurting the company. Stock prices, employee, morale, client confidence. Everything has been affected by your absence." "And what about Tommy's safety?" Marcus shot back. "What about the fact that every news story about Chen Technologies puts my son back on the radar of every crazy person who thinks kidnapping a CEO's kid is their ticket to easy money?" Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she watched the argument escalate. She was beginning to understand that her simple act of kindness had somehow become the catalyst for forcing Marcus to confront all the issues he'd been avoiding for months. "Daddy?" Tommy's small voice cut through the tension. "Are you and Uncle Jake fighting?" Both men immediately stopped talking and looked at the child. Marcus took a deep breath and reached over to smooth down his son's hair. "We're not fighting, buddy. We're just talking about grown-up stuff. Sometimes grown-ups get a little loud when they're trying to solve problems." "Is it about the broken truck?" Tommy asked with the logical simplicity of childhood. "In a way it is," Sarah said, surprising herself by speaking up. She looked at Marcus. "Your truck breaking down tonight, meeting me, Jake finding you here, the news about the donation, it all happened at the same time. Maybe that's not a coincidence." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Sarah chose her words carefully, very aware that Tommy was listening. Sometimes when we're trying really hard to avoid something, the universe has a way of forcing us to deal with it anyway. Maybe tonight is telling you that it's time to find a different solution. Jake leaned forward. Sarah's right, Marcus. You can't keep living two different lives. It's not fair to Tommy, it's not fair to your employees, and it's definitely not fair to you. Marcus looked around the diner, taking in the warm, cozy atmosphere that had become his refuge over the past few months. But what if going back means putting Tommy in danger again? What if I can't protect him? What if staying hidden means you can't help people who need you? Sarah countered gently. I work with sick children every day, Marcus. That $50 million donation you made, it's going to save lives. Kids who are fighting cancer, kids who need heart surgery, kids whose families can't afford the medical care they need. How many children are you helping by being Marcus Chen, CEO, versus how many you're helping by being Marcus who drives an old truck? She could see her words hitting home. Marcus looked at his son, who was now drawing what appeared to be a hospital with a big red cross on the front. The new wing is going to be so cool, Tommy said without looking up from his drawing. Maybe. They'll have a playroom with video games for kids who have to stay there for a long time. How do you know about the new wing? Marcus asked, surprised. You and Uncle Jake were talking about it last week when you thought I was watching cartoons. Tommy replied matter-of-factly. You said it was going to help kids like the ones Miss Sarah takes care of. The innocent revelation made both men exchange looks of amazement. Sarah found herself smiling despite the seriousness of the situation. It sounds like Tommy understands more about what his father does than you give him credit for. I know Daddy helps people with his computers, Tommy said, finally looking up from his drawing. And I know Mommy would be proud of him for helping build a place where sick kids can get better. The mention of his wife seemed to break something loose in Marcus's chest. Sarah could see him struggling with emotion as he looked at his son's earnest face. Tommy, Marcus said carefully, how would you feel if Daddy had to go back to working in the big office building instead of staying home so much? Tommy considered this question with the seriousness of a child who had learned that his opinions mattered to his father. Would I still get to see you every day? Of course you would, buddy, every single day. And would you still be helping people? Yes, I would still be helping people. Maybe even more people than I am now. Tommy nodded solemnly. Then I think that's what you should do. Mommy always said helping people was the most important job. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the wisdom coming from such a small person. She looked at Jake, who was staring at Tommy with something like awe on his face. He's been ready for this conversation for months, Jake said quietly to Marcus. You're the one who wasn't ready. Before Marcus could respond, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from the hospital. She glanced at the caller ID and felt her heart skip a beat. I'm sorry, I need to take this, she said, answering the call. This is Sarah. The conversation was brief, but Sarah's expression grew increasingly serious as she listened. When she hung up, all three adults were looking at her expectantly. That was my supervisor again, Sarah said slowly. Apparently the hospital has been trying to reach Chen Technologies all evening about the donation. They want to set up a meeting tomorrow to discuss the project timeline, but they can't get through to anyone at your company. She looked directly at Marcus. They've asked me to try to make contact with you, since they know I have connections in the community. The thing is, there's a critically ill child who was just admitted tonight, a 7-year-old girl named Emma, who needs immediate heart surgery. But the current pediatric surgical suite isn't equipped for her specific condition. Marcus's face went pale. What kind of surgery does she need? The kind that the new wing would be designed to handle, Sarah said quietly. But construction hasn't even started yet. The hospital is trying to transfer her to Children's Hospital in the city, but she's too unstable to move. They're hoping that Chen Technologies might be able to expedite some of the equipment funding so they can retrofit the current surgical suite temporarily. The weight of the situation settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Tommy looked up from his drawing, sensing that something important was happening. Daddy, can your computers help the sick little girl? He asked. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, and Sarah could see him making a decision that would change everything. When he opened them again, there was a determination there that hadn't been present before. Jake, he said, his voice steady for the first time all evening. Call the hospital. Tell them I'll be there in 30 minutes to discuss the emergency funding. Then call the equipment suppliers in Germany and Japan. I don't care what time it is there. Wake them up if you have to. Marcus, are you sure? Jake asked, though his relief was obvious. I'm sure, Marcus replied, then looked at Sarah. Will you come with us? I know it's a lot to ask, but you understand both sides of this situation better than anyone. The hospital staff will trust you, and Tommy already thinks you're part of our family. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. Of course I'll help, but Marcus, you need to understand that once you walk into that hospital as the CEO of Chen Technologies, there's no going back to your anonymous life. The reporters will find out, the story will spread, and everyone will know that Marcus Chen is back. I know, Marcus said, reaching over to take Tommy's hand. But my son just reminded me what's really important. His mother would have never forgiven me if I let fear stop me from helping a child who needs it. Tommy squeezed his father's hand and smiled. Can we go help the little girl now, Daddy? Yes, buddy, Marcus said, standing up from the booth. We can go help her now. As they prepared to leave the diner, Sarah realized that what had started as a simple act of kindness toward a stranded father and son had somehow become the moment that brought a grieving man back to life and potentially saved the life of a child he'd never even met. The broken truck in the parking lot had been the catalyst for something much bigger than any of them could have imagined. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the gleaming new pediatric wing of St. Mary's Hospital, watching through the observation window as a team of surgeons completed a complex heart procedure on a 3-year-old boy. The state-of-the-art equipment that surrounded them had been purchased and installed in record time, thanks to Marcus Chen's determination to ensure that no child would ever again be too sick to receive the care they needed. The wing had officially opened 3 months ago, with a quiet ceremony that Marcus had insisted be focused on the medical staff and the families they served, rather than on corporate recognition. He had learned to balance his public responsibilities with his private need for normalcy, creating a life that honored both his role as CEO and his role as Tommy's father. Miss Sarah, a familiar voice called out behind her. She turned to see Tommy running down the hall, his school uniform neat and his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. He was taller now and had lost some of his baby-faced roundness, but his smile was just as bright as it had been that first night at the diner. Hey, there, Tommy, Sarah said, kneeling down to give him a hug. How was school today? Really good. We learned about the heart, and I got to tell everyone about how the doctors here can fix kids' hearts with the special machines my daddy bought for them. Marcus appeared around the corner, looking more relaxed and confident than Sarah had ever seen him. He was wearing a well-tailored suit instead of the thrift store clothes he'd hidden behind, but his smile was warm and genuine. I should have known I'd find you two together, he said, joining them by the observation window. Tommy insisted on stopping by to see you before we head home. How did the board meeting go? Sarah asked. She had become Marcus's unofficial advisor on balancing his corporate responsibilities with his personal life, a role that had evolved naturally from their friendship. Better than expected, Marcus replied. The Asian expansion is ahead of schedule, and the new contracts with the Department of Health are going to fund pediatric wings in 12 more hospitals across the country. That's incredible, Sarah said, meaning it. Lisa would be so proud of what you've accomplished. Marcus nodded, his expression peaceful rather than pained when his wife was mentioned. I think she would be. And I know she'd love the fact that Tommy gets to see firsthand how business success can translate into helping people. They were interrupted by Dr. Williams, the chief of pediatric surgery, who emerged from the operating room with a tired but satisfied expression. How did it go? Sarah asked immediately. Perfectly, Dr. Williams replied, pulling off his surgical cap. That little boy is going to go home to his family next week with a completely healthy heart. 6 months ago, we would have had to transfer him to a hospital 3 states away, assuming he could have survived the transport. Marcus placed his hand on Tommy's shoulder. Do you hear that, buddy? Another family gets to stay together because of the work being done here. Can we visit him when he wakes up? Tommy asked. I want to show him my teddy bear. Sometimes when I was scared, Mr. Bear helped me feel better. I think that's a wonderful idea, Dr. Williams said. Healing happens faster when children have other children to connect with. As Dr. Williams headed off to check on his other patients, Sarah looked around at the bustling, state-of-the-art medical wing and marveled at how much had changed since that night at the diner. The broken truck that had seemed like such a disaster had actually been the beginning of something beautiful. "Sarah," Marcus said, interrupting her thoughts, "I have something to ask you." "What's that?" Marcus looked slightly nervous, which was unusual for him these days. The hospital board has been talking about creating a new position, a liaison between the medical staff and the corporate sponsors who fund projects like this. Someone who understands both the healthcare side and the business side, and who has the trust of everyone involved. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the chance to do what you already do, help children get better, but on a much bigger scale. You'd still work with patients, but you'd also help design and implement programs that could change pediatric care across the entire region. Plus," Tommy added with the enthusiasm of childhood, "you'd get to work with Daddy more, and we could see you all the time instead of just sometimes." Sarah looked at the two of them, the father and son who had wandered into her life 6 months ago and somehow become family. The offer was everything she had dreamed of professionally, but more than that, it was a chance to be part of something bigger than herself. "There's one condition," she said with a playful smile. "We have to promise to meet at the diner at least once a month. Dolores will never forgive us if we get too fancy to eat her pancakes." "Deal," Marcus said, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "Though I should warn you that the truck is completely fixed now. Jake finally convinced me to get it properly restored. It runs like new." "Good," Sarah replied, shaking his hand, "because I've grown attached to that old truck. It brought us together after all." As they walked toward the elevator together, Tommy between them chattering excitedly about showing his new friend the teddy bear, Sarah reflected on how a simple act of kindness had rippled outward to change not just their lives, but the lives of countless children and families they would never even meet. The broken truck had been fixed, but more importantly, the broken parts of Marcus's life had been healed through the power of connection, purpose, and the reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply help someone else. The CEO had revealed much more than just his identity that night. He had revealed the truth that real wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we give away and the lives we touch along the way. And for Sarah, who had only wanted a cup of coffee and a slice of pie after her long shift, the evening had given her something far more valuable: a new family, a new purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes the best things in life begin with the simple decision to stop and help a stranger in need.